Marcus Thorne owned 1,000 acres of dust and promise, a land of hard certainties and one impossible shadow. The shadow was a horse, a black stallion of such violent spirit that his men called him Obsidian, for he was dark, sharp, and unbreakable. He was the last wild thing on a ranch Marcus had fought to tame, a living emblem of the grief that had hollowed him out since his wife's passing 2 years prior. In the town of Redemption, a place that clung to the edges of the prairie like a stubborn burr, Marcus's struggle with the stallion was a well-known story, a drama watched from a safe distance. But a new story had arrived with the stagecoach, one that settled over the town with the uncomfortable weight of a summer heat haze. Her name was Lynn Way. She was to be the new schoolteacher, a slip of a thing barely 20 years old, with eyes that held the quiet depth of an old country, and skin the color of pale almond. She had been sent by a society in the East, an arrangement made before the town council knew she was Chinese. No man wanted her there. The women whispered behind their hands at the mercantile, their words a wall of judgment she met with a straight back and folded hands. She wore a simple white prairie dress, its fabric a stark contrast to the dust and the disdain. Marcus, a man who believed in the evidence of his own eyes and the strength of his own hands, saw only a fragile girl, utterly misplaced, a problem that was not his. He had his own untamable darkness to contend with, a creature of muscle and fury that mirrored the chaos in his own soul, and he had no time for the town's quiet cruelties, or the silent, solitary figure who now inhabited the abandoned schoolhouse at the edge of town. The schoolhouse had been a place of silent dust motes and forgotten lessons, its windows clouded with the grime of disuse. Lin Wei changed that. Every morning, as the sun broke over the flat horizon, she was there, a solitary figure against the vast emptiness. She swept the floors until the pine boards shone with a pale, clean light. She washed the windows until the harsh prairie sun could stream through unhindered, illuminating the empty benches that stood in neat, expectant rows. The women of Redemption watched her work. They saw the buckets of water she carried from the town well, the careful way she tended the withered patch of earth by the door, coaxing a few stubborn wildflowers to life. They saw her diligence, but they interpreted it as a desperate, unseemly effort to belong where she was not wanted. Mrs. Gable, the mayor's wife and the self-appointed guardian of the town's propriety, declared the situation untenable. "She cannot possibly understand our children, our ways," she announced at the sewing circle, her words finding fertile ground in the soil of their fear and suspicion. Marcus heard the talk when he rode into town for salt blocks and grain. He saw Lin Wei once, walking back towards the schoolhouse, her white dress immaculate against the brown, trodden earth. She did not look at him or anyone else, her gaze fixed on some distant point only she could see. He felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a grudging acknowledgment of her fortitude. It was a feeling he quickly dismissed. His own troubles were more immediate. Obsidian had thrown another ranch hand, a good man named Frank, shattering his collarbone and the last vestiges of Marcus's patience. The horse was more than wild. He was a vortex of rage, a danger to every man and beast on the Thorne ranch. His foreman, a grizzled man named Henry, approached him as Frank was being loaded onto a wagon bound for the doctor. "We have to put him down, Marcus, before he kills someone for good." The words were a bitter pill, an admission of failure that felt as profound as any loss Marcus had ever known. To destroy something of such magnificent spirit felt like a second death, a final surrender to the harshness of this land. He shook his head, the refusal tasting like ash in his mouth. Not yet. But he had no other answer. He had tried every horse breaker in the county, men who built their reputations on conquering the untamable, and each had walked away, bruised and defeated, shaking their heads. That afternoon, standing by the thick-timbered corral where Obsidian paced like a caged storm, Marcus felt the full weight of his despair. It was then that he saw her. Lynn Way was walking along the dusty track that bordered his property, her parasol a small circle of white shade against the oppressive sun. She stopped at his fence line, not looking at him, but at the horse. She stood perfectly still, her posture one of serene observation, a stark contrast to the violent, chaotic energy of the animal in the pen. The stallion seemed to sense her presence, his furious circling slowing to a tense, watchful walk. He stared at her, his dark eyes wide with a wild intelligence. Marcus felt an irrational spike of anger. He strode towards her. "There's nothing to see here. It's dangerous." Her gaze shifted from the horse to him, and for the first time he saw not fragility, but an unnerving calm. Her voice was soft, yet it carried clearly over the whisper of the wind. "He is not angry," she said. "He is afraid." Marcus stared at her, the words echoing in the space between them. Afraid? He saw nothing but pure, malevolent rage in the stallion's eyes, in the violent stamp of his hooves and the furious toss of his head. He saw a creature that sought to destroy everything that came near it. His ranch hands were afraid of the horse, the whole town was afraid of it, and he, Marcus Thorne, was afraid of what it was forcing him to do. The idea that the horse's violence was a mask for terror was so foreign, so contrary to every piece of logic he possessed, that he could only dismiss it. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his tone harsher than he intended. She did not flinch or look away. Her eyes returned to the stallion, who had resumed his agitated pacing, the muscles in his powerful neck bunched and tight. "His spirit is trapped," she continued, speaking more to herself than to him. "He fights the cage, but he does not understand the bars." She gestured with a small, graceful movement of her hand, not at the wooden corral, but at the air around the horse. Marcus followed her gesture, seeing only the swirling dust and the shimmering heat. He was a practical man, a man of fences and ledgers, of branding irons and seasons. He did not understand talk of trapped spirits. Yet he could not deny the change that had come over the horse in her presence. The frantic energy had subsided, replaced by a focused, wary attention directed entirely at the small woman in the white dress. He had exhausted every conventional method. He had offered bounties to the best horsemen, and they had failed. He was a day away from taking a rifle to the most beautiful animal he had ever owned. A silence stretched between them, thick with the heat of the sun and the weight of his impossible choice. "What would you do?" he asked. The question pulled from a place of desperation he would never admit to. Lin Wei finally turned her full attention back to him. "I would not try to break him," she said simply. "I would ask him to be free." The next morning Marcus gave the order. His men, Henry included, looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "You're letting her in the pen with him?" Henry's voice was a low rumble of disbelief. "She'll be trampled inside a minute." Marcus's jaw was set. "Stay back, all of you. Open the gate when I say." He felt a fool. He knew he was a fool, grasping at the cryptic words of a girl the town considered less than nothing. But he was a desperate fool, and that made all the difference. He escorted Lin Wei to the round pen. She had refused his offer of a heavy coat or leather chaps, her simple white dress looking impossibly fragile against the backdrop of raw timber and packed earth. She carried nothing in her hands, no rope, no bridle, no stick. As she approached, Obsidian began his dance of intimidation, snorting, kicking up dust, and circling the pen with a speed that was terrifying. The ranch hands watched from a safe distance, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and scorn. "Gate," Marcus said, his voice tight. The heavy wooden gate groaned open just enough for her to slip through. She closed it quietly behind her, the latch clicking into place with a sound of finality. She did not walk towards the center of the pen, or make any move towards the horse. Instead, she walked to the fence and stood with her back to it, a few feet from the gate, and became still. She folded her hands before her and lowered her gaze to the ground. She waited. The stallion continued his display, a whirlwind of black fury, but his circles began to widen, his snorts becoming less aggressive, more questioning. He was a force of nature meeting an object of absolute calm, and the collision was not what anyone had expected. There was no impact, only a slow, baffling diffusion of energy. Marcus watched, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip, every muscle in his body coiled and ready. But the shot he expected to have to make never came. Days bled into one another under the relentless summer sun. The routine became a strange, silent ritual on the Thorn Ranch. Each afternoon, Lin Wei would arrive on foot, and Marcus would escort her to the round pen. Each day she would enter, stand in her designated spot, and wait. The first few days she did not speak at all, her silence a form of communication more profound than any command. She simply existed in the horse's space, a calm, non-threatening presence. Obsidian's frantic energy slowly dissipated, his wild pacing replaced by a wary stillness. He would stand at the far side of the pen, watching her, his ears twitching, processing this strange creature who demanded nothing of him. On the fourth day she began to speak. The words were not English. They were soft, melodic sounds that rose and fell with a gentle cadence. She spoke in Mandarin, a language of her past, a language the horse could not possibly understand, yet he responded to its tone. He would lower his head, his breathing would slow, and the fear in his eyes would recede, replaced by an intense curiosity. Around the end of the first week, she brought a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She knelt, untied it, and laid out a handful of fragrant green leaves she had gathered from the low hills. She pushed them gently under the fence and retreated to her spot. It took an hour, but eventually the stallion's curiosity overcame his caution. He approached slowly, sniffing the air, and then delicately lipped the leaves from the dusty ground. Marcus watched it all from his seat on the top rail of the fence. He had stopped expecting disaster and had started simply observing. He saw not a schoolteacher, but a woman of immense patience and a quiet, unyielding strength. He was witnessing a language that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with respect, a concept his horse breakers, with their ropes and spurs, had never considered. He was beginning to understand what she meant by asking, not breaking. Word of the strange happenings at the Thorn Ranch trickled into Redemption like a slow leak. At first, it was just the talk of Marcus's own men, their initial scorn replaced by a grudging, baffled respect. They described how the Chinese girl would stand in the pen with the killer stallion, unarmed, speaking in her foreign tongue until the beast grew calm. The story was too fantastic to be readily believed, and it quickly became embellished in the telling. At the mercantile, Mrs. Gable spoke in hushed, scandalized tones of witchcraft. "It's unnatural," she insisted to a rapt audience. "She's put a spell on the animal, and on him too, it seems." Others speculated it was some kind of Eastern trickery, a secret art that was both fascinating and deeply suspect. The town, which had first dismissed Lin Wei as insignificant, now saw her as a figure of mysterious and possibly dangerous power. Reverend Michael, a man whose piety was matched only by his fear of the unknown, felt it his duty to intervene. He rode out to the ranch one afternoon, his face a mask of solemn concern. He found Marcus by the corral, watching the now familiar scene unfold.
Linway stood inside the pen while Obsidian grazed peacefully on a handful of herbs near her feet.
"Marcus," the Reverend began, his voice heavy with warning, "this is not right. The town is uneasy. You are consorting with pagan ways. This woman, her methods are not of God." Marcus turned slowly, his gaze leaving the tranquil scene in the pen to land on the anxious face of the clergyman. A month ago he might have agreed. He might have shared the same suspicion, the same fear of what he did not understand. But he had spent weeks watching true strength in action, a strength that had nothing to do with force and everything to do with quiet understanding. He felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "She is succeeding where all your good, God-fearing men have failed, Reverend," Marcus said, his voice level and cold. "Her ways are quiet, and they are gentle. Perhaps you and the town could learn something from that." The sky had been a searing, cloudless blue for weeks, baking the earth into a cracked and thirsty canvas. Then, one afternoon, the change came. A bruised purple line appeared on the western horizon, expanding with an unnatural speed. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a strange electric stillness that silenced the birds and sent the cattle lowing nervously in the fields. Marcus saw it coming from the porch and felt a familiar dread. Prairie storms were swift and merciless. He yelled for his men to secure the livestock, his voice nearly swallowed by the first sudden gust of wind that tore through the ranch, whipping dust and loose hay into a frenzy. In the chaos, he nearly forgot about Lin Wei. She had arrived for her daily session an hour earlier. He ran towards the round pen, the wind pushing against him like a physical blow. He saw her inside, standing near Obsidian. The Stallion was no longer calm. The drop in pressure, the scent of ozone, the rising howl of the wind, it had undone weeks of patient work, stripping him back to his raw, terrified instincts. He was circling again, his eyes white-rimmed with panic. Just as Marcus reached the fence, a fork of lightning split the sky, striking a tall cottonwood not 50 yards away. The explosion of sound was simultaneous with the blinding flash. A massive limb cracked and fell, but it was a secondary strike, an errant finger of electricity that found the corral. It hit the top rail post, shattering the thick timber into a spray of lethal splinters. The way out was now open. Obsidian reared, his powerful body a silhouette of pure terror against the darkening sky, ready to bolt through the breach and into the maelstrom, to a certain death on the open, storm-lashed prairie, where a panicked horse could easily break a leg in an unseen ditch. The ranch hands shouted, their voices lost in the roar of the wind. Henry scrambled for a rope, a futile gesture against such primal fear. Marcus felt a cold wave of helplessness wash over him. The horse was lost. All that work, all that patience, undone in a single violent act of nature. But Lin Wei did not run. She did not scream or cower. As the panicked stallion prepared to leap through the shattered fence, she moved. She placed herself directly in his path, a small, unmoving figure in a simple white dress, standing between a terrified, 1,000-pound animal and the deadly freedom he sought. The wind tore at her clothes and whipped her dark hair across her face, but she stood her ground, her feet planted firmly in the churning dust. She was a lighthouse in the heart of the storm. She did not raise her hands to block him. She did not shout a command. She began to speak, her voice impossibly carrying over the gale. It was not the soft, melodic hum he had heard before. It was a sound of immense and resonant calm, a clear, steady tone that cut through the chaos like a blade. It was the language she had used for weeks, the language of quiet respect. Obsidian skidded to a halt just feet from her, his chest heaving, his powerful body trembling. He was trapped between two terrors, the raging storm behind him and the serene, unyielding woman before him. He tossed his head, snorting, his eyes rolling back, but he did not charge. He held his ground, his panic warring with the strange sense of safety she had so painstakingly taught him. Then, slowly, deliberately, she raised a hand. Not to strike, not to grab, but as an open, gentle offering. "Shun," she said, the word clear and firm. "Follow." And the great black stallion, the untamable spirit, the creature no man could break, lowered his magnificent head, touched his nose to her outstretched palm, and allowed her to lead him away from the broken fence, step by careful step, toward the shelter of the barn. When the last of the rain had passed and the bruised clouds had moved east, a stunned silence settled over the ranch. The air was clean and cool, the world washed new. The story of what had happened in the corral during the storm spread faster than the storm itself. The ranch hands who had witnessed it spoke in low, awed tones, their skepticism burned away by the lightning. They no longer saw a strange foreign girl. They saw a woman who had faced down a force of nature and a panicked beast with nothing but her own courage. In town, the narrative shifted entirely. The whispers of witchcraft died, replaced by murmurs of wonder. The tale of the schoolteacher who calmed the thorn stallion became a local legend, a testament to a kind of strength redemption had never before encountered. The following Monday, the schoolhouse bell rang out over the town, and for the first time it was answered. Children arrived, scrubbed and curious, their parents escorting them to the door with newfound deferential respect for the woman inside. The benches were no longer empty. That evening, Marcus rode to her small cabin behind the schoolhouse. He dismounted and approached the door, holding a heavy leather pouch. When she answered, he stood for a moment, searching for words that felt adequate and finding none. "I came to pay you for your work with the horse," he said finally, holding out the pouch. Lin Wei looked at the pouch, then back at his face. She did not reach for it. "My work was for him," she said softly, "to soothe his fear. It does not require payment." "Please," Marcus insisted, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "This is not payment for a job. This is a token of respect for what you did, for who you are." He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes before she gave a small, graceful nod and accepted the pouch. He should have left then, his business concluded, but he remained on her doorstep. "The name you called him in the storm," he asked. "Shun?" She nodded. "It means to follow, to be obedient in a good way." He looked back towards his ranch, where the black stallion now stood peacefully in a repaired corral. "It suits him," he said. Autumn arrived, painting the prairie in shades of gold and russet. The harsh heat of summer gave way to a crisp, clean air that promised change. The schoolhouse was now the vibrant heart of the town, its windows glowing with lamplight in the late afternoons, the sound of children reciting their letters a constant, reassuring hum. Lin Wei was no longer the Chinese schoolteacher. She was Miss Wei, a figure of quiet authority and deep respect. The women who had once whispered behind their hands now sought her advice on herbal remedies, and the men who had openly scorned her now tipped their hats when she passed. The transformation was complete. On his ranch, Marcus found a different kind of peace. He renamed the stallion Shun, and the horse became his constant companion. The wild, fearful spirit was still there, but it was tempered now by trust and a deep, quiet bond. The animal that had been a symbol of his untamed grief had become a testament to the power of patience and understanding. One crisp October afternoon, Marcus rode Shun to the edge of town, the horse's gait smooth and confident. He stopped by the schoolhouse, the sounds of a lesson drifting through the open window. He didn't dismount. He simply sat in the saddle, watching. He saw Lin Wei moving between the rows of children, her white dress replaced by a more practical one of deep blue. He saw the gentle way she corrected a student's slate, the small smile she gave another. She was where she belonged, a beacon of quiet strength that had not only tamed a wild horse, but had also gentled a wild and fearful town. She looked up then, as if sensing his presence, and their eyes met through the glass. No words were exchanged. None were needed. A slow smile touched Marcus's lips, and he saw an answering light in her eyes. It was not an ending, but an unspoken beginning, a shared understanding that bloomed in the quiet space between two solitary souls who had, against all odds, found a way to be seen.